Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for our virtual Voices of Inclusion speaker series. We're so excited. This is our third time doing this and it's getting better each time. We're getting more folks involved and we look forward to having these each month. And this month, we're really excited to have a special guest with us, Fred Maahs, who is the editor of Melange Accessibility for All magazine, and he is a world-renowned disability advocate. So we're going to learn more about his life and hear what he's up to now. And I'm sure he has some words of wisdom to share with all of us. So without further ado, I want to welcome Fred.
Oh, thank you so much, Millie. It's truly a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thanks for taking the time and spending a few minutes. And as I was joking, but I'm serious about this. We'll make this as casual and as informal as possible. So again, thanks for joining us. Millie, I'm not sure where you want me to start, but just give a little bit of background about me quickly. I'll try to be quick.
Take your time.
So
that's where we were going to start.
Yep. Born and raised here in Wilmington, Delaware, and that's where I'm living now. For me, grew up, in your average middle-class family, and I've got one brother, and we're about a year apart. And when I was 18, literally just 4 days before starting college, I was on vacation with my family and some friends down at the beach near Dewey Beach here in Delaware. And my dad and I were in the water and we were raking for clams. If any of you know what that means, we were literally at chest high water raking for clams. I got hungry, so I got up on the boat, was down in the kitchen getting something to eat, and all of a sudden I heard this guy just start screaming, some guy. And so I ran up on deck and saw that we were anchored in the bay. And I saw that a guy, just the stranger, had a small sailboat, but somehow had fallen off of his sailboat and his boat was literally heading right at our boat. And my dad was already in the water. So my first reaction was, you think, in that split second, okay, you just got on the back of the boat, chest high water, you've done it a million times, easy. So instead of running to the stern, the back of the boat where I got on, I ran to the bow, got up on the rail, and I dove, thinking that it would be chest high. I did not know that the bow of the boat was resting on a sandbar in about a foot of water. So when I dove, I hit top of my head. I learned this later, but when I hit, I was just stopped and I couldn't move. I knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. And so I had just enough strength to push my head out of the water and was able to get help. So once they got my dad and my brother got me back on the boat. I was flown from the hospital down in Lower Delaware to Thomas Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. And about a day later, I found out from the neurologists and the surgeons that I had fractured my seventh vertebrae in my neck. So if you touch the back of your neck and you feel that big knot where your neck connects to your shoulders, that's the vertebrae that I shattered. I bruised my spinal cord and was paralyzed from the chest down. But I was alive, and so that was the good news. A day after that, I had surgery where they literally took a chip out of my hip. The process is called a laminectomy, and operated and fused my spine at where the vertebrae was broken to stabilize it. And so from there, I spent about 7 months in the hospital in Philadelphia, learning how to be strong, independent, and do as many things as I could on my own. But what I found out was, now this was 10 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so I figured this was September of 1980. And not many things were accessible back then. And I got a letter from the president of the college that I was going to attend, and he apologized. Well, first he said, he was really sorry to hear about the accident, but apologized that the college I was going to attend was not accessible, and that he would help me find another college, if I needed his help. But luckily, a friend of mine, what at the time was the dean of Widener's Delaware campus here in Wilmington, and she said to me, she said, why don't you come to take some summer courses over the summer, help us adapt to the campus, because we've never had anybody with a disability attend this campus before, which, to me, it sounded kind of strange, but to them, it was just because. So I did. I took some summer courses, helped them adapt the campus. And in the fall, I enrolled full time. And it was an interesting learning experience, not just for me, but for the teachers and counselors there, because again, for the first time having somebody, at least with a physical and visible disability, they all of a sudden they had to start thinking differently, right? And so as I was thinking about this process and thinking about, okay, what do I do with my new life? That started my journey to become an advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. When I got out of the hospital, and as I was starting these summer courses, I was going to the store, going to the movies, you name it, just like I typically would. But I didn't see people like me, somebody with a disability using a wheelchair, out and about. And for me, that was kind of crazy. And I'm like, all right, I know I'm not the only one. I know that there are other people with disabilities. But unfortunately, back then, and it wasn't that long ago, most people with disabilities were kept home, right? Because even someone like me, we were referred to as shut-ins. We didn't have access to public places. We didn't have the curb cuts. We didn't have wide doors. We didn't have ramps. So most places that you went to, you couldn't get into. So I decided that I needed to start to do something about that. So I joined, there was back then, the mayor of Wilmington had an access advisory board. So I joined his access advisory board and became the vice chair. And we literally would sit down with licensing and inspection and other teams from the mayor's staff. And we would review building plans before places were actually completed being built. We would make sure that they were actually accessible and that people with disabilities would have the same opportunity to have access as others. Then I joined the advisory board for a local museum here called Winterthur Museum, and helped them to adapt the museum and their exhibits for people with disabilities. And when I say disabilities, I want you to understand it wasn't just for people that used a wheelchair. We took into consideration all types of disabilities. So physical, cognitive, intellectual, you name it. Our group was a diverse group of people with different types of disabilities. So we would look at the various ways and various needs that people had in order to accommodate them. In 1982, I had my first corporate job, which was interesting. So my dad he was a builder at the time here in Delaware and was building these office buildings not too far from my house. And he said, they're hiring. You should go and interview. And so I did. I got hired. But when I started my very first corporate job was in a 2-story building, and my office was on the 2nd floor, and they didn't have an elevator. This was 1982. So every day, and I wasn't driving yet, and I drive with hand controls now, but I wasn't driving yet. So After I would finish my morning classes at college, I would get picked up from there, dropped off at work, and then two guys from my department on the second floor would come down. They would pick me up, chair and all, and take me to my office. And so again, you know, another thing that I had to speak up about. And fortunately, a couple of years later, we moved into a new office building, a bigger building that had an elevator. But all the while, you know, still trying to speak up and speak about the needs for people with disabilities. And so that experience began a long corporate career of more than 30 years in working for Fortune 50 and Fortune 100 companies. I did work for a nonprofit, Easter Seals. Some of you may be familiar with. I worked for Easter Seals, Delaware and Maryland's Eastern Shore for about 5 years in the middle of that long corporate career, and helped them to increase their visibility and helped with some of their public relations and government relations issues. When I first started there, I told the CEO, I said, I'll give you a year. I'll help you as much as I can, and then I'm going to go back to corporate world. Well, you know, I drank the Kool-Aid, so to say. So that year turned into 5. I worked for Easter Seals for about 5 years. And then after I felt that I'd really done as much as I could, I did go back to the corporate world. But I told my CEO, I said, listen, even though I'm leaving Easter Seals, I will always find ways to make sure that the companies that I work for get involved with Easter Seals. And I did. I worked for Aramark for about 4 years in Philadelphia. And the very first year I was there, I was able to get Aramark involved with Easter Seals in their annual volleyball challenge, sending teams of people down to volunteer and help raise money. And then when I went from Aramark to Comcast, I was able to get Comcast involved with Easter Seals by providing them with grants for assistive technology. So now, all around the country, through these grants, Easter Seals had established the Assistive Technology Fund, using various types of technology to help people with disabilities in many different ways, and was also able to do that similarly with an organization called the ARC, helping people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, also through technology. So I was able to do all of these things you know, on behalf of people with disabilities while I was in the corporate experience. But for me, even though I was doing it, it felt like it was part-time. I wanted to do it, you know, full-time. So a year ago, this past April, so April of 2019, I left Comcast to start my own business. And so I have my own business, FJM Consulting, FJM and FJM Solutions Consulting for disability services. In addition to that, I partnered with a company out of Canada called Travel for All, which I'm going to talk to Millie more about. But so imagine that somebody with a disability wants to travel to a place that where you have specific needs. So you may want to go to I don't know, France or England or Italy, wherever it is, but you need certain accommodations. You may need a personal care attendant. You may need an accessible vehicle. You may need oxygen or other types of medical necessities. So what Travel for All will do is work with you on your itinerary to make sure that all of those needs, not just your plane ticket or your train ticket, but all of those needs in addition to the tickets are in place so you can enjoy your experience while on your vacation. And we're the only company that does it globally, which is pretty unique. We work with about 1,000 partners and vendors, suppliers around the world to help do that. And then finally, very fortunately, a few months ago, probably about, gosh, almost a year ago now, I started working with Travel for All, and my newest partner, Debbie Austin, who is with Melange Magazines, and we're working on a project together. And Debbie said one day, she said, you know, I have this travel and lifestyle magazine for the Caribbean, but I'm learning more about disabilities, and I want to learn more about people with disabilities. So I think I'm going to start a magazine, uh, for people with disabilities, and we'll call it Accessibility for All, which you're all now familiar with and have been featured in our very first inaugural issue. So thanks to Debbie and her team, Best Buddies, and the organization and your upcoming event is all famous now. And hopefully we'll continue that relationship with Best Buddies and other things. So I in many ways, I've been very fortunate to take my experiences over all of those years since my accident to become an advocate for people here in the state of Delaware, and then take that to the national level. And finally, now working on behalf of people with disabilities around the world. I was very lucky to I was asked to come to Dubai last November and speak at their very first accessible tourism summit and talk about the needs and all of the infrastructure that needs to be in place in order for people with disabilities to travel. And so did that and represented the US there with about 12 other speakers from around the world. And then most recently, I was in Israel back in February, helping the Ministry of Tourism there, helping them to assess their accessibility throughout Israel in order for people with disabilities to travel and just enjoy Israel, and then do an assessment on that, reporting back to the government there. And I'll be doing that for other governments in the very near future. I've been asked to come back to Dubai. Was supposed to happen this November, but because of the COVID virus, that's been put off until next year. But looking forward to that and many other things. So lots of things in the works, which you'll read about, and hopefully you'll follow us in Maahs Accessibility for All magazine, or on Twitter and LinkedIn and other things. But I don't know, Millie, if that was enough, too much, or what, but you wanted to hear the story, and believe it or not, that was the shortened version. So
that was amazing. What a life that you have led.
Just been lucky enough to have the right people around me to help.
Yeah. Well, I think the two things that really stuck out in your experience, especially early on, were things relating to accessibility and representation. And I think you're having to go through that sort of baptism by fire and be thrust into a world that wasn't ready to receive you as you were, is something a lot of people can relate to. And just the thought of buildings not having elevators to us nowadays is, insane. But it wasn't long ago where, there were no ramps, there were no dips in a curb to help make sure people could get from point A to point B. And the work that you've done and really engaging the corporate world too, has paved the way for so many of us to be able to not even have to think twice about going places and having opportunities. So before we get too far into the conversation, I think on behalf of Best Buddies community, we thank you for paving the way, because it's you've only given us a snapshot of the things you've done and the things you've accomplished, and it's already so impressive to hear about. But that idea too of representation is interesting because, a lot of people don't think they can become something unless they see an example of that. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about being in the corporate world and feeling like, was there ever a time you felt tokenized by others, or you felt ostracized or different than your peers and colleagues?
Great question. So for the most part, I would say no. Interestingly enough, in each of the places that I worked for, so I worked initially for Core States Bank of Delaware when they first came here. I was the first employee there, with a disability in Delaware in their offices. So I was just doing my thing. I was there to do a job. I wasn't there because I had a disability. I wasn't there, to represent the disability population. I was there because I was capable and I had the wherewithal to do the job. And I didn't want to be treated special. I didn't want to be treated any differently than anyone else. But what the effect that it had was, and without really thinking about it, they had to think totally differently now, from their management style and processes to their HR style and rules, and you name it. Now all of a sudden, it's them thinking, all right, what do we do? Because back then there really wasn't the rule book, the guidebook, and so it was interesting to be able to work with them in the process. They weren't making up the rules or making the accommodations without me. They literally would come to me and say, we'd like to talk to you about, which doesn't always happen, or at least it didn't back then. But for each of the companies that I worked with, they were just great about it, frankly. Even in my last role, when I started at Comcast in their headquarters in Philadelphia, we were at an older building, one of the buildings, Comcast buildings in Philadelphia. And even though that building was pretty much accessible, they were building the new tower at 17th and JFK. And before they opened that building, they came to me and said, listen, we'd like to ask you to come through the building and help us make sure that it's accessible and that it is adapted for people with disabilities. So before the new building opened, I was able to do that. And also, even for their newest building, the Innovation and Technology Center right across the street, literally worked with a team of people, other people with disabilities, it's kind of weird to even think of, but when we moved into the building at 17th and JFK in 2008, February of 2008, I'm pretty sure that I was still the only person there, the only employee there that had a visible physical disability. And, project ahead all these years later, when they opened the Innovation and Technology Center, there were others, and finally, was seeing other people with other types, similar or other types of disabilities. And we worked together with the architects and management to make sure that people of all abilities were included in the decision-making process. I'm sure you've all heard the saying, nothing about us without us, right? So make sure that when you're making a decision about or for people with disabilities, that you're including people with disabilities in that process, right? It's all about inclusion. It's not just about diversity. It's not just about hiring people, of different abilities, but making sure that you're including people with disabilities in the decision-making process. And that's key, and that made all the difference in the world. Now, to your specific question about being tokenized or ostracized, admittedly, okay, there were times where I knew for sure that, I'm not sure how to put this, and I hope it comes across the right way, but for public relations purposes or other purposes, for the company, they needed that person with a disability in the photo or in the article or in the interview. But because, and I would volunteer because I felt good about what they were doing I didn't have negative thoughts or felt that I was being used in any way, but because the things that they were doing to be an inclusive company, and working with an internal diversity and inclusion team, employee resource groups that had people with disabilities represented. I was happy to do that. Had it been where I was being tokenized without my permission, or there was some type of negative or other implication, it would have been a different story. But in those instances, I was okay with that.
That's great. I think it's really all about recognizing the humanity of others.
Yep.
And a lot of times, we think about that in terms of race relations or things like that, or LGBTQ issues. But
Right.
people with disabilities, sometimes when we talk about diversity and inclusion, that
Yep.
inclusion aspect does not always extend to our disabilities community. So I'm glad
Correct.
to hear that you've had those positive experiences. And it is that representation is important. And so the fact that you had an interest in achieving that as well, and that those two goals aligned with the company that you were working for is great. I know Hillary had a question kind of in regard to your international work,
Yes.
because we know here in the United States, we have come a long way with the disability rights movement. But she was curious how many other countries currently have laws like the ADA. So I don't know if you could speak to that.
Great question. So I cannot tell you specifically how many other countries have a law like the ADA, but what I can tell you is that there are many that do, and that number is growing. So a lot of the requests that I get many times are from countries that will, right up front, they'll say, we want to learn more about accessibility. We want to learn more about the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so they're actually using the Americans with Disabilities Act as the model, right? So I've gotten that request, when I was in Dubai, got it when I was in Israel. I've got it from a number of countries throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, Jordan, and others. So again, I don't know the exact number, but I do know that more and more countries are trying to do their part to make, where the places they're living, living and working, more accessible, more accommodating, more adapted to people and for people with disabilities.
Well, that's good to hear, because I think a lot of us take for granted that we could travel anywhere in the world in normal times, not right now, but that they wouldn't confront any issue in terms of their accessibility or their rights. But it is now more present in my mind that that's something to consider, and I'm glad that countries are taking initiative to see what they can do to be more accommodating for people and equal.
So
Um,
if I could
yeah.
interject for a second. So for those of you who have checked out our issue of Accessibility for All magazine, there is a section in there where I have just wrote some ideas, thoughts about travel tips for people with disabilities. One of the things that I think is essential, if you're not already doing it, any trip that I take, and it could be from here to Chicago, or it could be from here to, I don't know, France. Do your homework, because not every understanding or interpretation of the word accessibility is the same. So while they may have in their mind that they're accessible, I can't tell you how many times here in the U.S., I will call and make sure, because I don't want any surprises, that that the place that I'm going to is in fact accessible. Excuse me. And a lot of times, I've gotten the reaction, well, yeah, we're accessible. We've got rooms on the first floor. Well, that doesn't tell me much, right? That doesn't tell me that the doors are wide enough to get into the room, or that the bathroom is accessible, or whatever it may be. So just make sure that when you're traveling, if you don't already do this, that you call ahead, ask very specific questions, tell them, very specific what your specific needs are, and that they're clear. A lot of times I will even, especially if I'm traveling out of the country, I'll send an email to the manager and ask them for pictures of the room. Show me pictures of the bathroom, the bed, you name it. I've been in accessible rooms where, and I'm not kidding you, I've got photos of this here in the U.S. where the bed is as high as my shoulders. And so immediately I'd call the front desk, and we've got a little situation here. And they'll send somebody down and say, well, what's the problem? Like, well, I've got a catapult into the bed here, so we've got to fix this, or whatever. But yeah, some crazy stuff sometimes, and it's not always outside of the country. It happens quite frequently here in the U.S. So
we had a question from one of our visitors from New York. One of our staff members, Nina, asked if you have any good recommendations for places you've traveled that have been really accessible and accepting
yes.
for folks with disabilities.
Sure. So, gosh, I mean, you could take that a lot of places. Here in the U.S., I would say, for some reason, California always seems to be really progressive, right? So it's the weirdest thing. So fashion trends, travel trends, etc., seem to start in California and slowly make their way east. So California tends to be, for the most part, especially in Los Angeles, south, down to San Diego, seem to be very accommodating for people with disabilities. Denver, for anybody who's been to Denver is really great for accessibility. Florida, and a lot of that is attributed to it is a very geriatric state. More older people are living in Florida, so lots of places are accommodating more older people and people with disabilities in the state of Florida. Traveling outside of the U.S., there are a lot of places, interesting places, great places to go in the Caribbean. That's one of my first places that outside of the U.S. that I traveled to. Small island, Aruba. Been there a bunch of times. It's small. It's literally the island is 6 miles wide, 22 miles long. The entire island is flat except for there's a thing that they actually call the hill in the center of the island. It's 600 feet high. That's it. But for the most part, very, very accessible. And over the years, it's gotten better. From when I first went there in 2003, nothing really for accessible transportation, unless you could transfer yourself from a wheelchair into a car or whatnot. And that's since gotten better with accessible vehicles. But hotel accommodations, accessible for the most part. And they're making progress as well. Dominican Republic, another, if you get to some of the resorts there, Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory, hopefully soon to be a state, very accessible. The Bahamas has gotten better, and those are the islands that I've been to. Lots more to come, but I'm told that Barbados is also very accessible. You can find resorts on Antigua that are accessible, some in St. Thomas and St. John. But again, do your homework. It depends. You can find that the resort itself is accessible, but once you get outside of the resort, it's not so much. My trip to Israel, frankly, I was shocked. I'm thinking, oh my God, I've read about these places in my religion classes over the years, or stories that you read in the Bible, and you're thinking there is just no way that the old city and other places are going to be accessible. But I was really, really surprised about the level of accessibility in Israel, both in Jerusalem and then when you travel over to the Mediterranean and Tel Aviv, how accessible they were. And that's going through the old city, and that's going through the Mount of Olives and other places, even hiking up to a near the Dead Sea on a mountain called Masada, accessible. And so they're paying really close attention. One of the interesting things that I found out about Israel is that the youth there, once they graduate high school, have to spend 3 years in the military. And once there are many that will come out of the military with some type of injury, physical injury or cognitive injury. And because of that, the Israeli government has really paid much more attention to things that are accessible, et cetera, in Israel. And they're getting there. They have more work to do, but they're getting there. And they are in many ways using the Americans with Disabilities Act as a model to work from. Yeah. France, England, some of your more modernized countries, Spain, Italy, lots of parts of Italy. I spent some time in Rome and Florence, accessible there. I think in some of the older countries, we're still young here in the U.S. You talk about history. We only have about 300 years of real history here. To other countries, and they're looking at thousands of years of history. But when you get into those countries, cobblestones are not my friend. So you have to watch that and navigate it. But you will find many places that are accessible. And frankly, that's part of what we want to bring to you in Maahs Accessibility for All magazine. Over time, you're going to see those stories. I wrote a very lengthy story in this issue, the current issue, about Israel. And you're going to read about others. And we're going to hear from others, pardon me, people with different types of disabilities that you'll hear from in the magazine and about those accessible places.
Well, if you need any roving reporters, we might have some good folks to travel around and report back what they've experienced. But absolutely. I was curious how the transportation industry, in your assessment, how they're doing to accommodate folks that might need some accommodation in terms of airlines and trains and things like that.
So great question, and actually perfect timing. So for many, many, many years, too many years, the airline industry has been just battered with all of the things around accommodation and accessibility. When I first started flying after my accident back in 1981, it was a horrible experience to transfer from your wheelchair to this little tiny aisle chair, and just the whole process. It took many years even for airlines to think about this. It took many years for airlines to even think about, geez, what about an accessible bathroom? Oh, well, yeah. But to this day, I'm not aware of a truly accessible bathroom, primarily because the aisles are not wide enough for a regular chair. So they will tell you that your flight attendant will help you onto the aisle chair, and they'll help you to the door of the bathroom. But from there, you're on your own unless you're with someone. And the interesting thing is that both in transportation and even hotel accommodations, because I travel a lot on my own for business, they're not expecting somebody like me to travel alone. I think in their mind, oh, well, they're always going to have somebody with them who can help. Well, that's not always the case. We want to be independent. We want to travel and live independently, and we should have those accommodations. The airline's working on it, though. I've served on a few panels in Washington at the White House talking about accessible transportation with the Department of Transportation. Um, they've for the past couple of years, and we keep hearing that they're close to coming up with a new way of seating people with disabilities on a plane safely and supposedly addressing the accessible bathroom issue. Amtrak, I've told people this for years. If I could take a train everywhere, I probably would. And for the most part, Amtrak trains are not only accessible, but they have accessible bathrooms. It's easier, the whole process of even getting on and off a train, much easier than a plane, less time involved. The automobile industry making progress there too. I drive a full-size two-door car right now with hand controls, but if you really take notice, they stopped making full-size two-door cars a long time ago. And the reason I say a two-door is when I get into my car, the door is wide enough that I can get my chair up to the driver's seat close enough. And then I turn and I fold my chair and I pull it behind the driver's seat. You can do that because there's no doorpost between the front door and the rear door, like a four-door car has. But the automobile industry is starting to pay a little bit more attention. For years I've written to the automobile industry saying, look, not everybody who uses a wheelchair wants to necessarily drive a van. They would love to drive a car, but you need to make accessible cars. So I think their answer now is, of course, on the horizon are the autonomous vehicles, which are self-driving. We'll see how safe they are. I don't know. They've had some hiccups there, which is dangerous for anyone. I will tell you that a large disability representing nonprofit organization in Washington that I'm affiliated with, that's all I can say, is working with a major automobile manufacturer for an accessible electric van, which I think is going to be pretty exciting once it hits the market.
Wow. So I think we have a little bit more time left, and I want to make sure we have some time for questions. But the topic that I see popping up a couple times in our chat has to do with voting. And I think more generally speaking, we have some folks on the call today who are ambassadors for Best Buddies, and that means that they are sharing their personal experience as having a disability to help the community better understand that perspective and raise awareness about the importance of inclusion. So as we are all disability advocates in our own right, and we have an expert here with us today, I think we're all interested in what advice you might have as to how we can best serve the disabilities community and advocate, and what are sort of the priorities that you think people should really be focused on, and how do they exercise their right to vote to make sure that their voice is heard in this election?
So obviously very timely. First of all, for anyone who is of voting age that's on the call, I can't stress enough, especially in this year's election, please, whatever you do, if you don't do anything else this year, get out and vote. Make sure that you are there on November 3rd. If you're not already, mailing in your ballot, make sure that you vote. I have looked at both the platforms. I've listened to leadership from both the Biden and the Trump campaigns. Vastly different. We keep hearing, at least we're told, that from the Trump campaign that that while they want to basically abolish the Affordable Care Act, but they claim that they want to make sure that people who have pre-existing conditions would be covered going forward. We've seen nothing, frankly, that would absolutely guarantee that that's actually the case. So I don't put much faith in that personally. I don't want to try to get on a political platform here, but I would just say that everything that I've read and everything that I've been told from the Biden campaign, as far as I can tell, and others others in leadership that I work with, it's a much more credible platform, and that of course Vice President Biden wants to take the Affordable Care Act, and a lot of people call that Obamacare, but they want to take that and they want to build on it, and recognizing that when the Obama administration put that all together, that had some kinks in it, things that need to be worked out, and that's what the Biden administration wants to do. They want to work on that and making sure and ensuring that people with pre-existing conditions, people with disabilities, are covered and have the health care that they need. Not only have the health care, but that it's affordable. So if you were to look at just one piece of each of the campaigns and look at the healthcare piece of it, vastly different. And in my opinion, they're not even close. If you were to look at other parts of their campaign and their platform, from economics to clean and green energy, I still would have to go with the Biden campaign and the Biden administration compared to what the Trump organization is talking about. But I think, no matter whose campaign or whose candidate that you believe in, my requests, I would just say very strongly, please just make sure that you get out and vote, represent. I don't know how else to put it, but other than if you don't get out and vote, but after the election, you're not happy with the way things turned out, you have nobody to blame but yourself. I mean, if you didn't seize that opportunity, you're right as an American citizen to vote in an election. Use it and do it. It's important. It's critical.
Yeah, and just to sort of echo what Andrew said in the chat, obviously, Best Buddies remains neutral and nonpartisan. And we did last month our Voices of Inclusion speaker series. We invited the committee of 70 to join us and share information about voting. I think one of the issues is there's a lot of misconceptions about whether people with disabilities are able to vote or have the right to vote, and they certainly do. So
Absolutely.
Andrew asked a great question about accessibility in voting, and you're likely a lifelong voter. So curious, from your perspective, do you feel that there's more that we need to do to make it accessible for everyone, including those with disabilities, to vote?
So great question. I do think that since the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's gotten much more easier for people with disabilities to vote. And what you can do is you can contact, here in Delaware at least, and I'm sure throughout the country, if you have a specific accommodation in order for you to help you vote, you can contact your local government and let them know what that is. And they can best advise you on where to go to make sure that your vote is counted. In the times that I have, physically voted, I have not had an issue because they have designated for me where the accessible polling places were. And this year, strictly and merely because of the virus, I decided that I was going to mail my vote in. So I think you do have options. They may vary from state to state. That part I don't know. But the easiest way to find out is to call your local government, and they will tell you where your accessible polling places are and the best accommodation, what your specific need is, what they would advise you to do in that instance. But yes, everybody with a disability who's of voting age has absolutely the right to vote.
Well, thanks for that. I think we can sort of open it up a little bit more to see if anybody has questions, or, if you have any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share for our ambassadors, for the folks that are involved in our programs, and want to do the best job that they can representing the disabilities community.
So while people may be thinking of another question, I guess, first of all, I want to thank you for the work that you do on behalf of people with disabilities. It's important for our minority, because we are a minority, that we self-advocate, that we help represent people with disabilities, that we continue to stand up and speak up for the rights that we are entitled to, because disability rights are human rights. They are civil rights. So don't be afraid to do that, to stand up. And when you aren't sure, ask questions. It's we stand on the shoulders of those who forwarded, who were on the path before us, and or paved the path before us. So I would say, ask questions, ask for advice, go to your buddy if you have a buddy, and ask them. You're going to find a lot of advocates, a lot of allies as you navigate this world that sometimes seems a little confused, or maybe just lots of stuff going on. But I think that there are plenty of people that are there and available to help and guide and to give advice. And I've been fortunate to have that advice and people to support me in my journey. And that's how we learn too, right? Every day is a learning experience. So when you have the opportunity to ask questions or ask for advice, do it and learn and do as much as you can. Because at the end of the day, we're all people first, no matter what our differences, our ethnic differences, our gender differences, our ability differences. We're all people first, and we're all here for a millisecond. So let's spend that time helping each other and doing what we can to make sure that we can all have the best lives and lead the best lives as possible.
I can't think of a better message to wrap things up on. Does anyone else have a question or a comment that they would like to share while we have Fred's undivided attention?
Yeah, Fred.
Okay, there's Lisa.
Yeah, hi, Fred.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, I go to the Gordon Mercy College. I'm the ambassador and the buddy director there. And what is your name of your magazine?
Oh, Lisa wants to help you plug your magazine one last time.
Well, thank you, Lisa. We appreciate all the plugging and promoting that you want to provide. So is Lisa asking the name of the magazine?
Yes, she wanted to know the name. And I think also Andrew did put the link to the latest issue in our chat. So Lisa, you can check that out too. But Fred, I'll let you take it away.
I don't have Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, no, we'll give you, Lisa, we'll send you the link to it. And actually in our state newsletter that's coming out, it'll have the link directly to the page that we're featured on, but then you can check out all the other great content. So Fred, you can tell her the name again. Go ahead.
Well, so Lisa, it's called Melange, Melange.
She's writing it down, I think.
Yeah.
So let me repeat that for you, Lisa.
Okay.
It's M like Mark.
And okay.
E like Edward.
Okay.
L like Larry.
Okay.
A like Andrew.
Okay.
N like Nancy.
Okay.
G like George.
Okay.
E like Edward.
Okay.
And then it's the word accessibility.
Okay.
For FOR.
All.
ALL.
ALL. Okay.
That's the name of the magazine.
Oh, cool.
And Fred, this is a magazine that people can go to a website and view. Is there a printed version of it as well?
So there's not currently a printed version, but you can go to the website, and that is www.read, READ, melange, MELANGE.com/accessibility. And that will take you to the magazine.
Andrew just put that link in the chat. So if you check out the chat on our Zoom call, you can click that and that'll take you right to the magazine.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew.
Anybody else?
And thank you, Lisa, for your question.
I'm good.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you again, Fred. This was such a great conversation, and it was so great to hear you talk about your amazing background and career and all the things you've done to enhance everyone's lives. Like you said, I think that's what our goal is across the board, and spreading more understanding and kindness and making sure that everybody has opportunity. So we really appreciate your time, and we hope to see you again soon. You're now a part of the Best Buddies family, whether you like it or
not. I welcome my brothers and sisters, and keep doing the great work that you're doing. Everyone on the call, the ambassadors and others, it really is an amazing organization, and it's important. The work that you do is important, and just keep doing it. Don't forget to vote.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
Good advice.
I cast my vote, but I'm not saying who for.
All right, so I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll hang on the call if anyone else has anything they want to share. But thanks so much.